Hi, everybody. Welcome to Unit 4. Unit 4 covers the period from 1800 to 1848, and it's the political, economic, and social growth of the nation. This covers 10 to 17% of the AP exam. There's a lot of information in here. And really what you need to think about, your guiding question for this period, in what ways did America grow politically, economically, and socially during this period? Again, it's a lot. But what you need to think about is this is the period where the American national identity is cemented. We've gotten through the revolution. We've gotten through the breakup stage. Now it's, okay, let's make this country work. So let's get into it. The rise of political parties in the era of Jefferson. You want to explain the causes and effects of policy debates in the early republic. Think about Federalists versus Democratic Republicans. The Federalist idea is still around, even though there are no Federalist presidents anymore. We're done with Federalist presidents. But the idea of federalism is going to stick around primarily through the work of John Marshall. John Marshall, I would argue, is the most important Supreme Court Chief Justice for you to know. You have to know John Marshall. You have to know Marbury versus Madison. Marbury versus Madison creates this position of judicial review, which allows the Supreme Court to review all lower court decisions, including states. And so the ideas of federalism, national government, being supreme over state governments is going to come up over and over again. Make sure you know the major Marshall court cases. Know the impact of the Louisiana Purchase. The country doubles in size. But how was that a conflict for Jefferson? Jefferson was a strict constructionist, and yet he went and bought this whole area of Louisiana without really consulting Congress, seemingly out of character. Secondly, look at the way that politics are shaping regional interests, or that regional interests are shaping politics. We're starting to see the country grow into North versus South versus West. And so we're seeing these regional interests affect national policy debates. Think about the impact of slavery, the growth of slavery. What are the compromises that the government begins to employ when it's looking at the impact of slavery? Think about the impact that tariffs are going to have. Tariffs are a big deal during this time period because typically a tariff will benefit one region of the country while maybe not being so great for another region of the country. And it pits North versus South versus West against each other. We're seeing a growing regionalism. Lastly, look at the American system. Make sure you know how important that is, that the country is starting to be linked by transportation networks and the impact that that's going to have, linking the agricultural South with the industrial North and the growing movement West. Slide 3, how and why did American foreign policy develop and expand over time? This includes not only foreign policy between America and other countries, but foreign policy with Americans and Native Americans. This is the time period where we see Indian removal really kicking into gear, especially under Andrew Jackson with the Trail of Tears. So what was going on with foreign policy shifts? We left off with George Washington giving a message regarding foreign policy. How has that changed during this period? Does it change? In what ways does it change? The market revolution, this is a term you need to know. This refers to the growing industrialization. Describe the causes and effects of innovations in technology, in agriculture, and in commerce. The three of those are going to be linked together. You have changes in agriculture that are really going to impact the South, which means the more land that you plant, the more profits are going to come in. The more labor you need, that's going to have an impact on slavery. And then you need a way to ship those goods to the factories in the North. The factories in the North are going to have technological improvements that allow for profits to be made at this time. We've got the growth of factory systems by Samuel Slater, interchangeable parts, inventions like the telegraph, inventions like the steel plow. These are all going to have an impact that relate to agriculture and manufacturing and commerce. All three of those are going to be linked together, and they're going to transform the American society. Look at how that innovation transforms the people. How does a factory culture shift the roles of gender, the roles of family. We also have a lot of migration coming into the country, specifically from Germany and from Ireland. Where do those groups settle? What types of jobs are they going to be looking for? There's also a shift from semi-subsistence agriculture to producing goods for foreign markets. People are working outside of the home, really for the first time. People are able to live in one place and work in another place, and they have separate spheres in their world. That's something that's unique. That's something that Americans hadn't really seen before. So how does that change family dynamics, gender dynamics? Does it change them? Spoiler, it does. Think about the expansion of democracy. This is a period where if you look at voter population charts or voter percentage charts, there is a spike in 1840. What causes that spike? What new group is voting that has never voted before? What is the encouragement for expanding the voting population? This also plays into the growth of political parties. We're seeing a shift in dynamic. Federalists are long gone, but now we have the Whig Party. Who are the leaders of the Whig Party? What do the Whigs want? How do they compare to the Democrats led by Andrew Jackson and Jacksonian Democrats that are so different from Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans? What are those differences? Find them. Jackson and the reshaping of the presidency, Jackson and the role of federal power. Andrew Jackson is one of those presidents that's really pivotal in changing the position of the presidency. How did he change that? How did he reshape the powers given to the president? How did he assume powers in the Constitution that may not have been explicitly given, but they weren't prohibited? So Jackson played on that. What are political party differences, again, regarding the role and the power of federal government in people's lives? And then what was Jackson's response to Western population growth? What was his response to Indian removal? How did he attempt to try to control that? Think about the American culture. Again, this is the time period when becoming American means a certain definition. America has now developed an identity. They're not just a fluke of a nation that happened to work during the revolution. It's a done deal now. America is real. So what does it mean to have an American culture? What are examples of American literature? This is the first time that we have a uniquely American literature genre, American art genre. The Hudson River Valley School of Art is unique to America, and it's a style of art not seen anywhere else in the world. What about the idea of America being an example of a perfect utopian society? There is this movement in the early 19th century of a belief in perfection, a belief that we as people can be better people. We can be a better society. We can create a more perfect society. So what are elements of that when we talk about utopian communities and Americans trying to find and create utopian communities? Part of that is going to be the Second Great Awakening. What are the causes of the Second Great Awakening? Why then? Why in America? Was it, in fact, a response to the market revolution? All of a sudden, the norms that Americans had sort of relied on of faith and family and home and work had maybe shifted outside the home. How does that play an impact on religion for Protestants? How would something shift there? And along with that, you've got an age of reform. This is a time period, again, where Americans are believing that they can create a more perfect self, a more perfect community, a more perfect society. So you've got a rash of reform movements, whether it's the temperance movement, doing away with alcohol, whether it's the abolition movement, doing away with slavery. This is where we first start to see the beginning of the women's suffrage movement, pushing for women to get a right to vote. We see reforms in the field of education, in political ideas, like who should be running the country. There's this embracing of trying to create a better union. That plays into the role for African Americans in the early republic. What are the continuities in the lives of African Americans And what were changes? We know that the end of slavery is coming. We know that the abolition of slavery will be successful. But what is causing it? What is happening in that timeline during 1800 to 1848? Most anti-slavery efforts in the South were largely limited to unsuccessful slave rebellions, but in the North, abolitionist efforts are growing and they're gaining momentum. And we know that eventually by the end of the Civil War, those abolition efforts will be successful. So what is it that is pushing that along during this time period? And then let's look at the society of the South in the early Republic. How did geographical and environmental factors shape the development of the South? Again, we know what's coming. We know the Civil War is on the horizon. It's going to wreck everything that the South thought was their stable ground. So what is it that's happening? Why is slavery so essential to Southerners' way of life? It wasn't predominant. Only 25% of Southerners actually owned slaves, but yet they would defend it passionately. So what was it about the structure of the South that was so dependent on slavery? Consider in as a part of that Western migration, that Southerners had started to deplete the soil in the Southeast of nutrients. And as America moved west, a lot of those same Southerners would pick up and move westward to more fertile soil, and they took slavery with them. So how does that growth of the country geographically, how does that also impact the growth of slavery? And we know that what's coming is going to be a showdown over slavery versus anti-slavery states. So how does all of this factor in from 1800 to 1848? Again, keep in mind, this is a time period where the country is getting its own American identity. It's cementing its identity as uniquely American. So keep that in the back of your head. We will come back when we talk about Unit 5 next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.